The lonely ranch. The sun hemorrhaged orange across the horizon, daubing the Montana sky in hues Sarah used to call God's own pyre. Dusty rivers leaned against a splintered fence post, the combined aroma of cured hay and equine musk permeating his weathered denim. One more day clocked. One more tick closer to what, though? He no longer possessed the answer. Just onward. He followed his cattle's slow amble toward the water trough, their bovine bellows a somber chorus rippling through the valley. Each cow was known to him, their lineage mapped, their individual behaviors cataloged. He knew this land intimately, every subtle contour and the rustling secrets of each pine stand. Yet familiarity offered little solace. It couldn't fill the void Sarah's absence carved into him. He pushed away from the fence, his joints issuing their familiar complaint. Supper beckoned, another soundless meal within the ranch house's echoing shell. The house, a faint ghost of her lavender, lingered in the air. He'd stubbornly left their bed untouched, the subtle floral trace a tenuous link to a vanished world he resisted relinquishing entirely. He crossed the living room, his gaze brushing over the sun-bleached photographs adorning the mantel. Sarah, mid-laugh, auburn hair a cascade down her back. Sarah, cradling a newborn calf, her eyes mirroring a shared elation. Sarah, gone irrevocably. He splashed icy water onto his face in the cramped kitchen, the frigid shock a momentary reprieve. He foraged in the icebox, retrieving a forlorn wedge of cheese and a neglected heel of bread. Appetite eluded him these days. A phantom image surfaced. Sarah, softly humming as she worked the dough, the kitchen infused with the comforting fragrance of rising bread. He would embrace her from behind, nestling his face in her fragrant hair. Finest baker in Montana, Sarah Rivers, he'd murmur, eliciting a crinkled-eyed smile. Only baker, more like this side of nowhere. He squeezed his eyes shut, the grief a searing internal wound. He yearned for her laughter, her touch, every facet of her being. He consumed the meager meal mechanically, each swallow devoid of taste. The silence intensified, a suffocating blanket. He needed escape. Hat and keys in hand, he headed for the truck. The engine sputtered to life, shattering the twilight's tranquility. He drove along the rutted track, headlights carving a path through the encroaching darkness. He arrived at the small hillside cemetery, final sanctuary for generations of Riverses. The air hung cool and heavy, scented with pine and moist soil. He crunched along the gravel path toward the unadorned granite marker. Sarah Rivers, beloved wife and mother. 1968 to 2018 he knelt, tracing the carved inscription with a calloused finger. The stone radiated a frigid chill. Evening, darlin', he rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. Another day done. The herd's faring well enough. Pastures holding. But, God, Sarah, the ache is a constant companion. He drew a wilted wildflower from his pocket, a solitary bloom that had defiantly pushed through by the creek's edge, and laid it gently on her grave. He lingered there, steeped in memory. He filled her silence with talk of the ranch, the capricious weather, the loneliness that stalked his waking hours. He described the wind's mournful song through the pines, how it echoed her cadence. He shared everything, intimacies he could confide in no other soul. As the moon ascended, painting the cemetery in long, spectral shadows, he rose. "Gotta go now, darlin'," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But I'll return. Always do." He turned, his silhouette stark against the luminous landscape. He carried the weight of her memory, a burden both crushing and infinitely precious. The future remained veiled, but he vowed to keep her alive within him, with every breath he drew. He drove back toward the ranch, headlights bisecting the empty ribbon of road. He understood the necessity of moving forward, of not remaining shackled to the past. It was what Sarah would have wanted, he knew. But learning to let go had become his life's most arduous task. Wildflowers and whispers, kneeling amidst a kaleidoscope of wildflowers, Lily Songbird's fingertips were dusted with a golden sheen of pollen. The sun, a warm weight on her shoulders, went unheeded. Scarlet poppies, cornflower blue, and the ivory of daisies offered a silent solace to the wounds within her. A wordless melody, echoing her mother's lullabies, escaped her lips as she tended the fragile stems. Her reality stood in bleak opposition to this vibrant haven. A mile distant, the Songbird farmhouse, coated in grime, harbored shadows and the constant barbs of Mrs. Songbird's tongue. Each dawn brought relentless chores, scrubbing floors, tending livestock, all under the scornful eyes of her in-laws. Meager meals of thin broth and stale bread were her lot, while Mr. and Mrs. Songbird feasted on choice cuts and warm biscuits. Evenings dissolved into mending and cleaning, her own well-being a distant afterthought. She craved the tranquility of the fields. Here, bordering Dusty Rivers' land, she almost outran the ache in her bones and the gnawing in her stomach. The air, redolent with sun-baked soil and honeyed blooms, was a universe removed from the Songbird house's stale, rank air. Today, melancholy clung like a persistent shadow. Mrs. Songbird's cruelty had been especially sharp, accusing her of gluttony for a mere morsel of bread. The woman's words, barbed and laced with venom, had struck deep, leaving Lily feeling diminished and unworthy. A sudden dimming of the light made her pause, but she didn't lift her head. Probably just a hawk circling high above. She resumed her weeding, her movements slow, almost ritualistic. Dusty Rivers, framed by the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, watched the girl's quiet industry. He'd noticed her frequent visits over the past weeks, a solitary presence in his fields. Initially, he dismissed her as a wandering child, but her subdued manner had sparked his curiosity. The slump of her shoulders, her averted gaze, the almost desperate care she lavished on the blossoms. It all spoke of a profound sorrow he couldn't ignore. He saw her push a stray lock of raven hair from her face, revealing the hollows of her cheeks. Her patched dress, the oversized, scuffed boots, all painted a picture of deprivation. A certain vulnerability stirred within him, awakening a long-dormant part of his soul. He knew the Songbirds by reputation a sour, grasping lot. He'd encountered them at the general store, their faces permanently creased with discontent. He'd paid them little attention until this moment. He debated approaching her, offering a kind ear or a helping hand. Yet something held him rooted to the spot. He was a simple man of the land, unaccustomed to navigating fragile emotions. Besides, he fought his own battles with the ghosts of the past. Instead, he remained concealed, a silent sentinel. He watched as Lily gathered a small posy of wild flowers, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. She cradled them close, as if they were treasures. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she turned and made her way back towards the Songbird place, her slight figure a silhouette against the dying light. Dusty straightened, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He couldn't stand idly by, watching her fade like a flower without water. Though he had no clear plan, he knew he had to act. He owed it to her, yes, but perhaps even more to himself. The ranch's silence now felt stifling, amplifying the unspoken promise he'd made in the fading day. A glass of lemonade. The sun bled orange onto the horizon, painting the wheat field in hues of fire and gold. Dusty watched her from the porch, a silhouette against the fiery canvas. She was out there again, lost in the rustling sea of grain. He'd seen her almost every evening for the past week, a quiet, solitary figure amidst the bounty of his land. He still didn't know her name. He poured a tall glass of lemonade, the condensation beating on the cool glass. The tart scent filled his nostrils, a summery fragrance that felt both inviting and nostalgic. He hadn't made lemonade in years, not since, well, a long time. He added a sprig of mint from the garden, then walked towards the field, the glass heavy in his hand. The dry stalks crunched beneath his boots as he approached. She hadn't noticed him. She was sitting cross-legged, her head bowed, her dark hair cascading around her face like a curtain. He stopped a few feet away, the silence thick with the chirping of crickets. "Evening," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She startled, her head snapping up. Her eyes, large and dark, widened with a flicker of fear before settling into a guarded neutrality. He could see the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame. "Hello," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. He held out the glass. "Lemonade. Figured you might be thirsty." She hesitated, her gaze darting between the glass and his face. Suspicion clouded her features. I don't want to intrude. No intrusión. Just lemonade. Made too much." He offered a small, reassuring smile. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and took the glass. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt a jolt of something he couldn't quite name. Her skin was cold. She took a tentative sip, her eyes closing for a brief moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a little stronger this time. "It's good." He sat down a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. The air between them vibrated with unspoken questions. "Dusty," he said, extending a hand. "Dusty Rivers." She looked at his hand, then back at his face. After a moment, she shook it, her grip surprisingly firm. "Lily," she said. "Lily Songbird." "Songbird," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "Pretty name." She didn't reply, taking another sip of her lemonade. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the rustling of the wheat. He noticed then, as she shifted her position, the faint discoloration on her forearm. A bruise, purplish-black against her pale skin. He averted his gaze, pretending he hadn't seen it. But he had. He cleared his throat. "You come out here often?" She shrugged, keeping her eyes fixed on the field. "Sometimes. It's quiet." It is that. He knew quiet. He'd lived with it for years. He watched her carefully. There was a fragility about her, a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside him. He saw another bruise, this one on her wrist, peeking out from beneath the sleeve of her oversized shirt. She seemed to notice his gaze, because she quickly pulled the sleeve down, hiding it from view. His gut clenched. He wanted to ask, to demand an explanation, but he knew better. He knew that some wounds were best left untouched, at least for now. "You live around here, Lily Songbird?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. She hesitated again, her eyes flicking nervously towards the road. "Nearby." He let it go. He wouldn't push. Not yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field. The air grew cooler, and the crickets chirped louder. Lily finished her lemonade and handed the glass back to him. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes. "I should go. See you tomorrow, Lily Songbird?" he asked, hoping. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Maybe," she said, and then she turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness. He watched her go, the empty glass heavy in his hand. The bruises, the fear in her eyes, haunted him. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Lily Songbird was carrying a burden far too heavy for her young shoulders. And he knew, just as surely, that he couldn't stand by and watch her carry it alone. The Cratchit's cruelty. The icy water numbed Lily's hands as she scrubbed the hearthstones, the rough bristles of the brush scratching against her skin. Jedediah Cratchit stood over her, his shadow a dark, looming presence in the flickering firelight. "Faster, girl," he barked, his voice a rasp that echoed in the cavernous kitchen. "Those stones aren't going to clean themselves, and I haven't got all day to wait on your dawdling." Lily pressed harder, her shoulders aching with the effort. She'd been up since before dawn, feeding the chickens, milking the cow, and preparing breakfast, a meager portion of oats that she barely touched, knowing Martha would complain if she ate too much. It was always too much, no matter how little she consumed. "Honestly, Jedediah," Martha chimed in, her voice dripping with saccharine disapproval. "You'd think she'd appreciate us taking her in, instead of mooning about like a wilting flower. A girl with no kin shouldn't be so picky about honest work." Martha bustled around the kitchen, pretending to be busy, but Lily knew she was being watched, scrutinized. Lily said nothing, her silence a shield against their constant barbs. She focused on the swirling patterns of grime on the stones, letting the rhythmic motion of her scrubbing lull her into a kind of trance. It was a trick she'd learned early on, a way to detach herself from the sharp edges of their words. "Look at her, staring into space," Jedediah scoffed. "Probably dreaming of lazing about all day. I swear, that girl's got sawdust for brains." Martha sniffed. "And no gratitude. We feed her, clothe her, give her a roof over her head. What more could she possibly want?" Lily bit back the retort that threatened to spill from her lips. What she wanted was simple: kindness, a moment of peace, a single word of encouragement. But those things were as rare as hen's teeth in the Cratchit household. The hearthstones gleamed faintly under the dying firelight, but Jedediah remained unimpressed. "Not good enough," he declared, poking at a stubborn stain with the toe of his boot. "Do it again." Lily's breath hitched, but she didn't argue. She plunged the brush back into the icy water, her fingers protesting with renewed aches. The cold seeped into her bones, a chilling echo of the coldness in their hearts. Later, after she'd finished the hearth and cleaned the rest of the kitchen to Martha's impossible standards, Lily was sent to the barn to muck out the stalls. The smell of manure stung her nostrils, but she welcomed the solitude. The animals, at least, didn't judge her. The old mare, Bess, nuzzled her hand gently as she shoveled the soiled straw, a silent gesture of comfort that brought a lump to Lily's throat. As dusk began to settle over the valley, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lily trudged back to the house, her body heavy with exhaustion. Supper was a silent affair. A small portion of stew was slopped into her bowl, the watery broth barely concealing the meager scraps of meat and vegetables. Jedediah and Martha ate heartily, their conversation a low rumble that excluded her entirely. Afterwards, she was given the task of mending clothes. Seated by the dim light of a flickering candle, she painstakingly stitched together a tear in one of Martha's dresses, her fingers clumsy with fatigue. The fabric was rough against her skin, a constant reminder of her own threadbare clothes. As the night deepened, the house settled into an uneasy quiet. Lily crept up to her small room in the attic, a cramped space under the eaves that felt more like a prison cell than a sanctuary. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes and whispering through the cracks in the walls. She huddled under a thin blanket, her body shivering, not just from the cold, but from a deeper, more profound chill. Despite the bone-deep weariness, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with a jumble of thoughts and memories, fragments of a life she couldn't quite grasp. All she knew was that she had to endure to survive. She had to find a way to rise above the Cratchit's cruelty, to hold onto the faint glimmer of hope that still flickered within her heart. Somewhere, somehow, she believed there had to be something better waiting for her. Whispers and gifts. The washboard road to the Cratchit place was a dental torture device. Today, each bounce felt like a hammer blow, echoing the anxiety twisting in Dusty's stomach. He wrestled the crate of bruised peaches and tired lettuce from his truck bed. The Cratchits were notorious for squeezing every last penny, even from rotten produce. Martha Cratchit, a woman sculpted from angles and disapproval, greeted him on the porch. "Took your sweet time, Rivers. Figured you'd abandoned us." Dusty bit back a retort. "Just a delay. Where's this go?" A flick of her chin indicated the back. "Shed." As Dusty lugged the crate toward the sagging structure, a sound knifed through the air, a thin, wavering cry, like a trapped fledgling. He froze, feigning a better grip. It came again, a strangled sob. He risked a peek. Lily was crumpled by the chicken coop, her small shoulders shaking. Looming over her was Jeb Cratchit, his face a canvas of raw anger. The words were lost to the distance, but the hostility radiating from Jeb was palpable. Then, Jeb's arm arced, a swift slash of denim followed by a soft, brutal impact. Lily winced, but remained silent. Dusty's fist tightened. He yearned to intervene, to topple Jeb like a felled tree. Yet, he knew that impulsive action would only amplify Lily's torment. Forcing himself to pivot, the tableau seared into his memory. He he deposited the crate. The dull thud resonated in the stifling air. Martha Cratchit-awaited, eyes like gimlets. "Everything satisfactory, Rivers?" Barely acknowledging her, Dusty stated his price, accepted the begrudged payment, and departed, a bitter taste coating his tongue. Back at his own farm, Lily's image lingered, a persistent shadow. Helplessness gnawed at him. He needed to act. The following day found Dusty drawn to the explosion of wildflowers bordering the Cratchit property. He parked his truck discreetly, then traversed the dry grass, his steps muted. He carried a smooth, pewter-colored river stone, polished to a soft sheen. He'd also dedicated the previous evening to sketching a horse, its mane a storm of freedom, galloping across endless plains. It wasn't much, but it was all he could offer. He nestled the stone, and drawing amidst the blossoms, near a stand of azure bluebells. He prayed she would find them. He hoped they could offer a moment's respite. 2 days later, he returned. They were gone. A jolt of elation shot through Dusty. He hadn't dared to expect her acknowledgement. He hadn't known if she even frequented this spot. But she had. He offered another tribute. This time, a small, intricately carved wooden bird unearthed from his grandfather's workshop. And another sketch, this one of an eagle in majestic flight. He maintained his routine, delivering the scant supplies to the Cratchits, enduring Martha's sour disposition, and witnessing, from afar, Jeb's callous disregard. Each time, he left a token amongst the blooms, a shard of turquoise sea glass, a vibrant plume, a simple drawing. One afternoon, as he placed a pearly seashell, tinged with lavender, near a cluster of daisies, a subtle whisper reached his ears. He turned slowly. Lily stood there, her eyes wide and wary, like a doe caught in headlights. She was even more diminutive than he recalled, her face ashen, her eyes underscored with fatigue. Her fingers were smudged with earth, and she clutched a faded azure ribbon. Silence hung heavy between them. She simply stared, her gaze flitting from Dusty to the shell. Dusty lowered himself to one knee, hands outstretched. "Hello, Lily." Her voice, a mere exhalation, finally broke the quiet. "You left these?" She indicated the wildflowers with a slight gesture. Dusty affirmed. "I did." A spark, could it be hope, flickered across her face. "Why?" Dusty paused, searching for the right words. Because everyone deserves a touch of beauty in their lives." She glanced down at the ribbon, then back at Dusty. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Then, pivoting on her heel, she vanished into the concealing tall grass before Dusty could utter another syllable. He watched her retreat, the pearly shell a silent covenant between them. Cries from the barn. The meadow felt wrong without her. Usually, the moment Dusty crested the small rise overlooking the wildflowers, he could spot Lily. A flash of scarlet against the green, her laughter carried on the breeze. Today, nothing. Just the humming of bees and the rustle of long grass. He told himself she was probably just late, maybe helping with chores at the Cratchits. But an uneasy feeling settled in his gut, a cold knot that tightened with each passing minute. He waited an hour, stretching it to 2, whittling a piece of scrap wood into a rough bird. The sun climbed higher, baking the field. Still no Lily. Finally, he tossed the unfinished carving aside and mounted Blue. "Just check in on a neighbor," he muttered to the horse, but the words felt hollow, a flimsy excuse against the growing dread. The Cratchit farm was a study in neglect. Paint peeled from the clapboard house like sunburnt skin, the porch sagged, and weeds choked the small garden. Dusty rarely came this way. The Cratchits were, well, they were Cratchits. Mean-spirited and tight-fisted, with eyes that darted around like cornered rats. He dismounted at the gate, the hinges groaning in protest as he swung it open. A mangy dog, ribs showing through its patchy fur, barked weakly from beneath the porch. Dusty ignored it and strode towards the house, intending to knock, but stopped short. A sound, thin and ragged, drifted from the barn. It was a cry, not an animal's cry of pain, but a human sound, choked and desperate. Lily. He didn't bother with the door. He strode towards the barn. the heavy wooden planks warped and gray with age. The cries grew louder as he approached, punctuated by sobs that tore at his heart. He pushed the barn door open, the rusty hinges screaming a drawn-out lament. The interior was dim, smelling of hay and dust, and something else, something sharp and metallic that made his nostrils twitch. Lily was huddled in a corner, her back to him. She was wearing a faded blue dress, ripped at the shoulder. Her dark hair was tangled and matted. He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the straw-covered floor. Lily, she flinched, drawing herself tighter into a ball. The crying intensified, a raw, keening sound that echoed in the cavernous space. He knelt beside her, reaching out a hand, then drawing it back, unsure. "Lily, it's Dusty. Are you hurt?" She didn't answer, just shook her head violently, the sobs racking her body. He noticed then the marks on her arms, dark bruises blooming against her pale skin, and the way she held herself, as if trying to disappear. "Lily," he said again, his voice softer this time. "What happened?" Silence. Then a whisper, so faint he almost didn't hear it. They said I didn't milk the cow right." Another sob. "They said I was useless." He saw now the welt rising on her cheek, a crimson stripe against her skin. He wanted to roar, to tear down the barn brick by brick, to inflict the same pain on those who had done this to her. But he forced himself to stay calm, to be the steady presence she so desperately needed. "It's okay, Lily," he said, his voice low and soothing. "You're safe now." He wasn't sure if she believed him, but he knew, in that moment, kneeling in the dust and straw, that he would do everything in his power to make it true. Standing up, dust devils danced around Dusty's worn boots as he marched toward the Cratchit homestead. The midday sun, a relentless hammer, pounded down on his Stetson, yet the inferno of his anger blazed even hotter. Sleep had been a distant luxury, Lily's spectral face haunting his every restless moment. He'd witnessed the Cratchits' cruelty firsthand, the barbed comments, the intentional last servings, the unending avalanche of chores. Enough. Without ceremony, he shoved the door inward, the hinges shrieking a metallic complaint. The Cratchits were at their rough-hewn table. Cratchit Sr., a massive figure with a perpetual thundercloud etched on his features, was gorging on beans. His wife, lean and watchful as a cornered coyote, observed him with undisguised distaste. Lily was absent. "Where is she?" Dusty's voice, a low growl, vibrated with suppressed menace. Pa Cratchit choked down his mouthful, the sound amplified in the sudden stillness. "What's it to you, Rivers?" "I asked where Lily is." "Ma Cratchit scolded." "Out back, doing what she's good for. Chickens need tending." Dusty's stare drilled into Pa Cratchit. "She deserves far more than this, more than being treated like unwanted livestock." Cratchit's fist detonated on the tabletop, sending cutlery jumping. "She's lucky we took in the waif. Ungrateful little. She possesses more gratitude than you warrant," Dusty interrupted. "I've seen your treatment of her, the degrading way you address her. It's unconscionable, barbaric." Ma Cratchit bristled, her eyes flashing with barely contained rage. "You got no call barging in here, telling us what to do." "Perhaps not," Dusty conceded, "but I retain the right to my opinion. And my opinion is that you're unfit to care for a stray cat, much less a defenseless young woman." Towering over the table, Pa Cratchit's face flushed crimson. "You're courting disaster, Rivers. Best leave now before you find it." Dusty remained unmoved. His gaze didn't waver. "I fear you little, Cratchit, and I'm not departing without Lily." He pivoted and strode toward the back exit, ignoring the torrent of enraged sputters and curses that chased him. The exterior air hung heavy with a mingled sense of manure and sun-baked earth. He discovered Lily in the chicken coop, her cheeks smudged with grime, gathering eggs. She glanced up, surprised, her eyes reflecting a precarious blend of hope and apprehension. "Lily," he said, his tone gentle, "I want you to come with me." She shook her head, the denial barely audible. "I can't. They won't," Dusty stated resolute. "I won't allow it. I'm offering you sanctuary at my ranch. A real home, at last." He scrutinized her, noting the hesitant disbelief shimmering in her eyes. You're not bound to remain here, Lily. You merit better. A place where you're secure, where you're cherished. Pa Cratchit erupted from the house, his features twisted into a mask of pure fury. She ain't going nowhere with you, Rivers. She's staying put. Dusty positioned himself in front of Lily, forming a protective barrier against Cratchit's wrath. She belongs where she's valued, and she certainly isn't receiving that here. He turned back to Lily, his voice softening. The choice is yours, Lily, but I need you to understand that the offer is genuine. You can return home with me. Tonight. He registered her hesitation, her gaze flitting back and forth between him and Pa Cratchit. Slowly, painstakingly, the ember of hope within her eyes began to ignite. A new home. The proposition hung heavy as the pre-storm air. Lily gazed up at Dusty Rivers, lines of hard living softened by an unfamiliar tenderness. Trust warred with ingrained suspicion, a battle she seemed destined to lose. Could she entrust her future to this man? Had she ever truly trusted anyone? I don't know, she breathed, the words lost in the chorus of crickets greeting the twilight. Dusty remained unhurried, his blue eyes wells of patience. No need to rush it. Just consider it. What happened to you ain't right, Lily. No one deserves that. Her gaze fell to her forearms, a canvas of fading purple and green, a brutal chronicle of her suffering. The notion of departure, of liberation, sang to her like a forbidden melody, both terrifying and sweet. Finally, her eyes met his. If I run, they'll hunt me down. Then we'll be ready for 'em, Dusty countered, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. I won't let them lay a hand on you. That decided it. The tremor of fear remained, but a defiant ember ignited within her. All right, she whispered. I'll go. Relief washed over Dusty's features, open and honest. Good. We should head out tonight before they get wise. He moved with surprising swiftness, his large frame belying an inherent agility. He instructed her to gather her belongings, but her possessions were scant. A tattered blanket, a well-worn dress, and a small, dull locket from her mother. These went into a rough burlap sack he unearthed from the shed. A sliver of moon hung in the velvet sky as they stole out the back. The air was pungent with the aroma of moist soil and the promise of showers. Dusty guided her towards a battered Ford pickup a short distance away. The engine sputtered to life, tearing the quiet. Lily shrank into the passenger's seat, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. The confines of the ranch felt worlds removed from the stifling atmosphere of the house she'd endured. The air was crisp, the sky boundless. The house was modest but solid, boasting a porch that embraced two sides. Dusty ushered her into a small room containing a narrow bed and a window offering a vista of horses grazing in a field. Ain't much, but it's all yours, he rumbled, his tone gentle despite its roughness. The initial days passed in a daze of apprehension and bewilderment. Lily winced at every unexpected sound, startled by the slightest movement. Dusty remained steadfast, granting her space yet remaining close, a comforting anchor. Gradually, the healing began. He initiated her into the rhythms of ranch life. He demonstrated how to tend to the chickens, how to gather eggs with a gentle hand. He showed her how to coax milk from a cow, her movements clumsy at first, then gaining assurance with each passing day. One morning, he led her to the enclosure where a kind-eyed mare waited patiently. This here's Belle, he announced, handing her a brush. Why don't you make friends? Lily hesitated, then extended a tentative hand to stroke Belle's velvety muzzle. The mare nudged her in response. Dusty showed her how to groom Belle, how to saddle her, and finally, how to mount. A cocktail of fear and thrill surged through her as she settled into the saddle, her muscles quivering. Dusty guided Belle around the corral, his hand firm on the reins. Just breathe, he advised. Feel her. She'll look after you. Slowly, Lily began to unwind. She sensed the cadence of Belle's stride, the sun's warmth on her face, the caress of the breeze in her hair. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she experienced a glimmer of joy. Days morphed into weeks. Lily mastered riding, repairing fences, and distinguishing the various wildflowers that peppered the fields. She learned the names of each horse, each cow, each dog. She absorbed the ranch's rhythm, the seasonal ebb and flow. Nightmares still plagued her sleep, and she still awoke with strangled cries on occasion. But now, there was someone to reassure her, to convince her that she was secure. And, little by little, she started to believe it. This newfound haven wasn't merely a dwelling. It was a covenant, an unspoken promise of protection, of restoration, of a future she hadn't dared envision. Papa. The dust cloud on the horizon thickened, resolving into a buckboard pulled by two weary-looking mules. Dusty watched from the porch, Lily a silent shadow behind him. He'd known this moment was coming, tasted it in the grit of the wind for days. The buckboard lurched to a halt just beyond the yard fence. Three figures unfolded themselves, two thick-set men and a woman whose face was pinched and hard as a winter apple. Cratchits. He recognized them from town. Rivers, the larger of the men, presumably the elder Cratchit, bellowed. "We've come for the girl." Dusty descended the porch steps, each footfall deliberate. "She's not going anywhere with you." His voice was low, but carried across the dry air. "She's family. Belongs with us." The woman's voice was surprisingly high-pitched, a shrill counterpoint to her husband's rumble. She clutched a worn shawl tight around her shoulders, her eyes darting nervously around the ranch. "Family doesn't treat their own the way you treated Lily," Dusty said, his gaze unwavering. He remembered the bruises he'd seen, the fear that still clung to her like the scent of wood smoke. "That's family business," the younger Cratchit spat, taking a step forward. "Doesn't concern you." The lonely ranch. The sun hemorrhaged orange across the horizon, daubing the Montana sky in hues Sarah used to call God's own pyre. Dusty Rivers leaned against a splintered fence post, the combined aroma of cured hay and equine musk permeating his weathered denim. One more day clocked. One more tick closer to what, though? He no longer possessed the answer. Just onward. He followed his cattle's slow amble toward the water trough, their bovine bellows a somber chorus rippling through the valley. Each cow was known to him, their lineage mapped, their individual behaviors cataloged. He knew this land intimately, every subtle contour and the rustling secrets of each pine stand. Yet familiarity offered little solace. It couldn't fill the void Sarah's absence carved into him. He pushed away from the fence, his joints issuing their familiar complaint. Supper beckoned. Another soundless meal within the ranch house's echoing shell. The house. A faint ghost of her lavender lingered in the air. He'd stubbornly left their bed untouched, the subtle floral trace a tenuous link to a vanished world he resisted relinquishing entirely. He crossed the living room, his gaze brushing over the sun-bleached photographs adorning the mantel. Sarah, mid-laugh, auburn hair a cascade down her back. Sarah, cradling a newborn calf, her eyes mirroring a shared elation. Sarah, gone irrevocably. He splashed icy water onto his face in the cramped kitchen, the frigid shock a momentary reprieve. He foraged in the icebox, retrieving a forlorn wedge of cheese and a neglected heel of bread. Appetite eluded him these days. A phantom image surfaced. Sarah, softly humming as she worked the dough, the kitchen infused with the comforting fragrance of rising bread. He would embrace her from behind, nestling his face in her fragrant hair. "Finest baker in Montana, Sarah Rivers," he'd murmur, eliciting a crinkled-eyed smile. "Only baker, more like this side of nowhere." He squeezed his eyes shut, the grief a searing internal wound. He yearned for her laughter, her touch, every facet of her being. He consumed the meager meal mechanically, each swallow devoid of taste. The silence intensified, a suffocating blanket. He needed escape. Hat and keys in hand, he headed for the truck. The engine sputtered to life, shattering the twilight's tranquility. He drove along the rutted track, headlights carving a path through the encroaching darkness. He arrived at the small hillside cemetery, final sanctuary for generations of Riverses. The air hung cool and heavy, scented with pine and moist soil. He crunched along the gravel path toward the unadorned granite marker. Sarah Rivers, beloved wife and mother. 1968 to 2018 he knelt, tracing the carved inscription with a calloused finger. The stone radiated a frigid chill. Evening, darling, he rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. Another day done. The herd's faring well enough. Pastures holding. But, God, Sarah, the